A sacred tremor felt in the jawbone, the golden throne's heartbeat. For 80 standard years, I preached that vibration as the pulse of divine will. I knelt in the Sanctum Imperialis, where that sound was loudest, where 10,000 pilgrims pressed their foreheads to marble worn smooth by 10 millennia of worship, and I felt saved. The air there tastes of ozone and frankincense, smells of candle smoke laid down in layers so ancient it has mineralized into the walls. When you breathe deeply in that place, you inhale faith made tangible. It coats your lungs like oil. I breathed it every day for 8 decades. My name is Inquisitor Valerius of the Ordo Hereticus. My rank, Interrogator Lord. My crime, comprehension. My sentence, execution at dawn 3 days hence. This document is my final testimony. It will not save me. It should not save me. What I have done cannot be undone, and what I have learned cannot be unlearned. But it can be recorded. It must be recorded, because the most terrifying discovery of my investigation is this: the truth was never hidden. It was always there, written in blood and fire across 10,000 years of history. We simply chose not to read it. It began not with doubt, but with a smell. The sealed archives beneath the phalanx hold records of the Great Crusade preserved in stasis fields, older than most planetary governments. These data crystals should smell of sanctified oils and preservation unguents. The servitors maintain them with religious precision, their mechanical devotions unchanging across centuries. Each crystal is cleaned, blessed, and returned to its vault with the same ritualized care a priest gives the Eucharist. But when I broke the seal on crystal Theta 77, containing the primary logs of the Eleanor Triumph, the smell that escaped was wrong. It was blood and wet soil, the smell of a fresh grave. I told myself it was contamination, a flaw in the stasis field. Perhaps some moisture had seeped through ancient seals, breeding decay in the supposedly eternal archive. But my hands were already shaking as I loaded the crystal into the reader. Some part of me, some animal instinct buried beneath 80 years of conditioning, knew what I would find even before the first image flickered to life. The first hour of playback matched every catechism I had memorized. The Emperor, radiant in gold, standing before the assembled might of his legions. 1,000,000 Astartes in perfect formation, their armor gleaming, their banners snapping in the wind of a conquered world. The orcs of Eleanor crushed beneath the inexorable march of unity. It was glorious. It was everything I had been taught to believe. Each frame of the recording sang with triumph, with the righteous violence of humanity reclaiming its place among the stars. Then I found the timestamp gap, 17 minutes excised from the record. Not corrupted, not damaged, deliberately cut, the data signature showing an edit made within weeks of the original recording. Someone had removed something. Someone with authority high enough that their excision had never been questioned in 10 millennia. The gap sat in the middle of the Emperor's address to the assembled legions. He was speaking, his voice resonating with power that made the recording equipment itself vibrate with harmonic feedback. Then, silence. A void where 17 minutes should have been. Then his voice again, but changed. The tone different, as if he had said something that altered the very texture of his speech. I was still loyal then. I told myself there were operational reasons. Security concerns. Perhaps the Emperor had revealed strategic information, deployment plans that remained classified even 10,000 years later. 17 minutes meant nothing against 2 centuries of conquest. The crusade had been glorious. That was what mattered, not the gaps. Never the gaps. But I could not stop thinking about the smell. I began to search for other gaps, other edits. The work consumed me like a fever. 3 months of my life disappeared into the archives. I stopped attending Mass, stopped sleeping more than 3 hours a night. My staff thought I was researching a new heresy, hunting for evidence of some chaos cult operating in the upper echelons of the imperial bureaucracy. They were right, but not in the way they imagined. The heresy I was hunting was far older, far deeper, far more dangerous than any chaos corruption. The pattern emerged slowly, like a body rising from deep water. Every major campaign had gaps. Every triumph had edits. The Rangdun genocides, 43 minutes, missing from the Emperor's personal log. The compliance of 6319, an entire day excised from the fleet records. The discovery of Primarch after Primarch, each reunion edited, sanitized, key moments removed. And always, the same authorization code, Sigma Phi Null. The Emperor's own cipher. He had personally censored his own history. That was when the doubt began. Not as a question, but as a sensation. A coldness in my chest that spread outward with each new discovery, like ice crystallizing in water. But doubt alone is not heresy. The Imperium is built on doubt, transformed into zealous certainty. Every saint in our pantheon began as a doubter. Thomas refusing to believe until he touched the wounds. Augustine the sinner becoming Augustine the holy. The path from doubt to faith is well worn, sanctified by 10,000 years of converts. I could have stopped there. I should have stopped there. Instead, I went deeper. Let me take you back to the beginning, to the catechisms, to the faith I held with every fiber of my being. Because to understand the magnitude of what I discovered, you must first understand what I believed, what we all believed, what the entire Imperium is built upon. The Emperor is the savior of mankind. This is the first truth, taught to every child from the moment they can comprehend words. But it is not merely taught through rote memorization or threats of punishment. It is felt. It is experienced in every breath drawn under his light. It becomes the foundation of consciousness itself, as fundamental as knowing your own name. I remember my first pilgrimage to Holy Terra. I was 12 standard years old, the son of a mid-hive administrator on a backwater agri-world whose name appears on no map of consequence. My father was a loyal servant, a man who spent 40 years managing grain tithes and ensuring the administratum's quotas were met with exactness. He was not a rich man. He was not an important man, but he saved for 7 years to afford passage for our family to Terra. 7 years of eating cheaper rations, living in smaller quarters, denying himself every comfort so that his children could make the pilgrimage. The journey took 4 months through the warp. I was sick for 3 of them, retching into recyc bins while the ship groaned and twisted through that impossible space. The Geller fields held, but barely. I could hear things beyond the walls. Whispers, laughter, screaming that might have been the ship's structure bending, or might have been something worse. My mother held me and sang prayers, her voice steady even when her hands shook with fear. Then we translated into the Sol system, and I saw it. Terra, the throne world. From orbit, it gleams like a jewel, its hives and spires catching starlight and returning it as prayer. The planet does not merely reflect light. It transforms it, processes it, sanctifies it. Every surface is worked metal and consecrated stone. There is no wilderness left on Terra, no empty spaces. Every meter of the planet serves a purpose in the great machine of imperial governance. As our shuttle descended, I pressed my face to the viewport and wept, not from sadness, from relief, from the overwhelming sense that after a lifetime of darkness, I had finally come home. We spent 3 days in the pilgrimage queues, 3 days standing in lines that stretched for kilometers, sleeping on permacrete, eating ration bars that tasted of recycled protein and faith. We were surrounded by billions of souls, all moving toward the same destination, the Eternity Gate. Pilgrims from every corner of the Imperium, a Schola Pergenium class from a fortress world, their heads shaved, their backs straight with military discipline. A merchant family from the Goal Stars, their skin pale from living under artificial light for generations. A penitent chapter of the Sisters of Battle, walking barefoot, their feet bleeding but their faces serene. I did not mind the wait. Every step closer, the air grew heavier with meaning. By the time we reached the Sanctum Imperialis, I could barely breathe for the weight of holiness pressing down on my chest. The walls themselves seemed to hum with power. Every stone had been blessed by 100 generations of priests. Every icon had been wept over by 1,000,000 pilgrims. The accumulated faith of 10 millennia had soaked into the structure like water into cloth. And then I felt it. the pulse. The heartbeat of the throne, transmitted through stone and steel and the bones of the faithful. It synchronized with my own heartbeat, a resonance so perfect it felt like coming into tune with the universe itself. For one eternal moment, I was not alone. I was not a scared boy from a nothing world in a nothing system. I was part of something vast and beautiful and eternal. That is what he gave us. That is what the Emperor means to humanity. Not merely survival, not merely unity, but the feeling of being held, of being loved by a father who would never abandon us, of mattering in a universe that treats most life as irrelevant statistical noise. The lessons we learned from him are written into the bedrock of our civilization. They are not optional teachings or philosophical suggestions. They are the load-bearing pillars that keep the entire structure of human civilization from collapsing into the void. The lesson of unity, that humanity must stand together or fall alone. I felt that lesson every time I saw a mixed company of guardsmen, Savlar scum and Cadian elites fighting side by side, their homeworlds separated by 50,000 light-years, but united in purpose. Men who in any other context would have nothing in common, whose cultures shared no language or custom or belief system, standing shoulder to shoulder because they served the Emperor. Unity not through homogeneity, but through common purpose. That was his gift, the lesson of strength that we must be hard, because the galaxy is harder. I felt that lesson in the calluses on my hands from holding a laspistol, in the scars on my back from fighting chaos cultists in the underhives of Gravis Major, in the ache in my knees from kneeling on stone floors during interrogations that lasted days. Weakness is not merely undesirable, it is lethal. The soft do not survive. Only through discipline, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment to our duty can humanity endure in a galaxy of horrors. The lesson of faith, that belief is armor against the darkness. I felt that lesson every time I pronounced sentence on a heretic, every time I saw doubt transform into certainty in the eyes of a penitent, every time I faced down a daemon with nothing but prayers and bolt rounds. Faith is not metaphorical protection. It is literal. A mind sufficiently fortified by belief cannot be touched by the warp. A soul committed to the Emperor cannot be corrupted. The strength to resist comes not from the body, but from conviction. These were not abstract concepts. They were the texture of life itself. The Emperor did not merely give us an ideology. He gave us the tools to survive in a galaxy that wants us dead. Consider what he saved us from. The age of strife lasted 5,000 years. 5,000 years of isolated worlds falling to madness, xenos predation, and the slow entropy of human nature. Warp storms severed every connection between the scattered colonies of man. The great diaspora that had spread humanity across the galaxy became a death sentence. On 10,000 worlds, civilization collapsed, governments fell, technology failed, knowledge was lost. On 1,000 more, humanity devolved into something no longer recognizably human. I have read the archaeological reports from the compliance actions. I have seen the pic captures of what humans became when left alone in the dark. Cannibal tribes worshipping their own excrement as divine. Technological societies that bred humans as livestock for protein production. The breeders having forgotten why they started the practice, but continuing it, because tradition demanded it. Worlds where mutation was so rampant that only gene sampling could prove the inhabitants had once been human at all. Children born with gills and scales, adults with multiple heads. Communities where the distinction between human and animal had blurred into meaninglessness. The Emperor found these lost children of Terra and brought them home. He gave them clean water, functioning technology, and the protection of his legions. He reconnected the scattered fragments of humanity into a vast web of trade, communication, and mutual defense. In 2 short centuries, he accomplished what should have taken 10,000 years. World after world brought into compliance. System after system integrated into the Imperium. The Great Crusade was not merely a military campaign. It was a rescue operation on a galactic scale. That is the scale of his gift to us. That is what he sacrificed everything to achieve, and we killed him for it. The Horus Heresy, the betrayal that shattered the dream of unity. 9 legions turned traitor, led by the War Master himself, the most beloved of all the Primarchs. Half of the Emperor's sons turned against him, convinced by whispers from the warp that their father had betrayed them first. They came to Terra with fire and madness, tore down the walls of the palace that had stood inviolate since the unification, and forced their way to the sanctum Imperialis itself. In the final confrontation aboard the traitor's flagship, the Emperor was forced to slay his most beloved son. Horus, corrupted beyond redemption, had to be destroyed. The psychic feedback from that act nearly destroyed the Emperor. Killing Horus meant killing a piece of his own soul. The father destroying the son he loved most. He survived, but only barely. Interred upon the golden throne, sustained by the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every day. He has held the Astronomicon steady for 10,000 years. The light that guides us through the warp burns with his undying will. Every ship that travels safely through that hell does so because he refuses to die. Every world that receives supplies, every message that crosses the stars, every prayer that finds its mark, all of it flows through him. That is not merely survival. That is sacrifice beyond comprehension. That is love made manifest as eternal agony. He could have let go. He could have allowed himself to die and be free of the pain. But he chose to endure because humanity needs him, because without the Astronomicon, we would be lost in the dark once again, isolated, vulnerable, dead within generations. So yes, I believed. I believed with every atom of my being. The Emperor was the savior of mankind. The heresy was our great sin, and our duty, our only duty, was to be worthy of his sacrifice. That was my faith, unshakable, absolute, the foundation upon which I had built 80 years of service, until I smelled blood and wet soil in an archive that should have smelled of oil and incense. The second gap I found was in the records of Monarchia. This one I had been taught about in seminary. The event was not hidden, though its interpretation was carefully controlled. The Emperor had ordered the word-bearers to accelerate their compliance pace. Lorgar, their Primarch, had been building elaborate temples on every world they conquered, wasting time on religious devotion when efficiency demanded swift integration. The word-bearers loved the Emperor too much. Their worship slowed the crusade. So the Emperor sent the Ultramarines to Monarchia, the word-bearers' most perfect achievement, and ordered it destroyed as a lesson. The official record presents this as a tragedy, a necessary but painful correction. The Emperor was forced to punish a beloved son for the greater good. It hurt him more than it hurt Lorgar. A father disciplining a child with a heavy heart, knowing the pain was necessary to teach a vital lesson. The destruction of Monarchia was an act of love, not cruelty, or so we were taught. But the orbital footage told a different story. I found the unedited recording in a sub-archive that should not have existed. Someone, perhaps a remembrancer or a Legion serf, had made a personal copy and hidden it. The file structure suggested it had been encrypted, hidden behind false directories, and mislabeled as maintenance logs. They must have died before they could do anything with it. The data crystal had been misfiled, lost in the bureaucratic chaos of 10 millennia, forgotten in a system that processes billions of documents per day. I watched it alone, in a viewing cell deep in the phalanx. The cell was designed for reviewing evidence in heresy trials. Soundproof, shielded. A space where even the most horrific confessions could be heard without contaminating the world outside. The footage was pristine. High-resolution orbital scan from a Ultramarines strike cruiser. Better quality than most modern recording equipment. I could see individual people in the streets of Monarchia. I could read the inscriptions on the temple walls. The city spread out below. White stone temples, catching the morning sun, their architecture a fusion of imperial efficiency and religious grandeur. Gardens between the prayer houses, green spaces where pilgrims could rest and contemplate. Broad avenues designed for processional marches. Millions of people beginning their daily devotions, moving through the city in patterns, as choreographed as a dance. This was not a city built for war. It was a city built for worship. Every stone placed with love. Every structure designed to elevate the soul. Then the Ultramarines opened fire. Not precision strikes. Not targeted destruction of military assets. Saturation bombardment. Cyclonic torpedoes that turned stone to glass, atmosphere to flame. The city did not collapse. It vaporized. In 17 seconds, 200 years of faith turned to ash. The temples cracked and melted. The gardens flash burned. The people simply ceased to exist. Not even time to scream before the heat turned them to vapor and shadow. But that was not what destroyed my certainty. War is terrible. Compliance is bloody. I knew that. I had ordered orbital strikes myself. I had watched cities burn from orbit and told myself it was necessary. The Emperor's peace requires the Emperor's violence. I had made my peace with that truth decades ago. What destroyed me was the audio. The Ultramarines kept their Vox channels open during the bombardment. Standard protocol, allowing real-time battlefield communication between ships and ground forces. But they were not the only ones transmitting. As the first torpedoes struck, the word-bearers on the surface began screaming. Not in rage, not in defiance, in bereavement, in the sound a man makes when he loses everything that gives his life meaning, the sound of faith shattering. One voice came through clearly, a chaplain, I think, though his rank markers were impossible to verify through the static and interference. He was not calling for vengeance. He was not cursing the Emperor. He was simply weeping and asking why, over and over. Why? Why? We loved you. We loved you more than our own lives. Why? His voice cracked on the last question, raw, primal, the sound of a heart breaking in real time. Then his transmission cut off, not from damage, from a deliberate signal termination on the Ultramarines' end. Someone had been listening to that grief and decided they had heard enough. They cut the channel, silenced the weeping, returned to the cold efficiency of orbital bombardment. After the bombardment, there was a landing. Guilliman himself descended to the surface to deliver the Emperor's judgment to Lorgar and his legion. The word-bearers were forced to kneel in the ashes of their greatest work, while the Ultramarines stood over them in judgment. 100,000 Astartes on their knees in the ruins of a city they had built with their own hands. A city they had loved. A city that represented everything they believed the Imperium should be. The official record states that the Emperor spoke to Lorgar telepathically during this humiliation, explaining the necessity of the act. That Lorgar understood, eventually, though it pained him deeply, that the lesson was learned, that the word-bearers would reform, become faster, become better, that this was a moment of correction, not destruction. The unedited footage shows something else. It shows Lorgar kneeling in glass and ash, his armor scorched, his face blank with shock. It shows him looking up at the sky, waiting for his father's words, waiting for explanation, waiting for anything that would make sense of this horror. And it shows the moment when he realizes no words are coming. The Emperor had made his point through destruction alone. There would be no explanation, no comfort, no acknowledgement of the word-bearer's devotion, just fire and silence. Guilliman stands before Lorgar, reading the Emperor's decree. The words are formal, bureaucratic, a list of failures and commands for improvement. But there is nothing in the decree that explains why. Why this city specifically? Why total annihilation rather than reformation? Why punish perfect faith instead of nurturing it toward more efficient expression? Lorgar does not move, does not speak. He simply kneels in the ashes of Monarchia and waits for his father's love to return. It does not return. After Guilliman finishes reading, the Ultramarines leave. They do not help rebuild. They do not offer guidance for how to do better. They simply leave the word-bearers kneeling in ruins. I watched that footage 17 times. Each viewing, I told myself there was context I was missing. Operational necessities. Strategic imperatives that justified such absolute brutality against a loyal legion. Perhaps there were hidden chaos cults in Monarchia. Perhaps the religious fervor was attracting warp attention. Perhaps the Emperor had seen some future threat that required this drastic action. But the voice of that chaplain, weeping in the ruins of his faith, remained with me. It followed me into my sleep. It echoed in my prayers. Why? We loved you. Why? That was when I began to understand. The smell of blood and wet soil was not contamination. It was truth seeping through the cracks in a carefully constructed lie. But I was not ready to accept it yet. Faith does not die easily. It clings to life with the desperation of a drowning man. So I looked for exonerating evidence. I searched for records that would explain, justify, redeem. Evidence that would let me return to certainty. I found something far worse. I found the Thunder Warriors. Most citizens of the Imperium have never heard of them. They are not mentioned in any official history. They are not commemorated in any shrine. Ask a priest about them, and you will receive a blank stare. Ask a scholar, and you will receive silence. They simply vanished from the record, like they never existed at all. 10,000 warriors who conquered Terra, who made the Imperium possible, erased from history so completely that even their names are lost. But they did exist. The Proto-Legion, the Emperor's first attempt at superhuman warriors, created during the Unification Wars on Terra. They were stronger than Astartes, more savage, less stable. They conquered Terra for him, crushed the techno-barbarian warlords who ruled the planet's surface, and brought the entire planet under his control in less than a century. They were heroes, legends, the first fathers of the Imperium. Then they were exterminated, not in battle, not fighting some xenos threat or chaos incursion. They were murdered by the Emperor's command, slaughtered by the very custodians who had fought beside them for decades. The official explanation, in the few documents that acknowledge their existence at all, is that they were unstable, flawed. Their genetic modifications caused aggression and cellular degeneration. They had to be retired. Retired. That was the word used in the kill orders. Like they were faulty equipment. Like they were machines that had outlived their usefulness, rather than men who had bled for the Emperor's dream. I found the kill orders in an archive so restricted that accessing it automatically triggered a review by the Inquisitorial Conclave. My clearance should not have been sufficient. My authority did not extend to these files. But when I requested access, it was granted within minutes. No questions asked. No review. Just a simple authorization code appearing on my terminal. Someone wanted me to find this. Someone wanted me to know. The orders were clinical, dispassionate. A list of Thunder Warrior strongholds with assigned custodian kill teams and expected casualty rates. Logistics for disposing of the bodies. Protocols for memory wiping any witnesses. The warriors were to be lured to a final campaign at Mount Ararat, where they would be ambushed and annihilated. No survivors, no witnesses, no records. The efficiency was perfect. The planning meticulous. This was not a decision made in haste or desperation. This was a scheduled extermination, planned months in advance, with contingencies for every possible outcome. But there was one record that escaped the purge, a personal log from a custodian named Constantin Valdor, the Emperor's closest companion. The entry was not part of any official report. It was a private reflection, written in a moment of what might have been doubt or guilt. Somehow it survived. Somehow it remained in the archives when everything else about the Thunder Warriors was erased. In it, Valdor described approaching a wounded Thunder Warrior after the slaughter at Mount Ararat. The warrior was dying, his augmented body finally failing, blood pooling beneath him on stone, still warm from battle. He looked up at Valdor not with hatred but with confusion, not rage but bewilderment. "We won," the warrior said. His voice was weak but clear. "We won. Why?" Valdor's response was not recorded, but he wrote this afterward. I could not tell him that victory was his crime. That stable, enduring peace had no place for warriors who could not be controlled. That the Emperor builds in layers, and we had reached the moment when the foundation must be buried so the next layer can be laid. I could not tell him he was always meant to be disposable. So I said nothing, and I killed him. I read that passage 43 times. Each time, My hands grew colder. Each time, the words seemed to reshape themselves, revealing new layers of horror. The Emperor builds in layers. The foundation must be buried. This was not a tragedy. This was architecture. The Thunder Warriors were not failed experiments. They were successful tools, used and discarded according to plan. Their instability was not a flaw to be regretted. It was an engineered expiration date. They were designed to be strong enough to conquer Terra, but flawed enough to justify their elimination afterward. The pattern was emerging. It was undeniable now. But patterns can be coincidental. They can be the result of necessity rather than intent. I needed more. I needed to find the mechanism, the design, the proof that what I was seeing was not tragic accident, but deliberate architecture. I found it in the Council of Nikaea, the council where the Emperor banned the use of psychic powers within the legions. The official history presents this as a necessary restriction, a safeguard against the dangers of the warp. Magnus the Red and his 1,000 sons had delved too deep into forbidden knowledge. They were approaching boundaries that should not be crossed. The ban was meant to protect them from themselves, to save them from the corruption that comes from peering too deeply into the Imperium. But I accessed the full transcripts, not the edited versions taught in every scala, not the sanitized summaries that appear in official histories, the complete, unredacted testimony of every Primarch who spoke at the council. 7 days of debate, hundreds of hours of argument, all of it recorded, all of it preserved, all of it buried beneath layers of classification. And in those testimonies, I found the truth. The ban was never about safety. It was about control. Magnus argued that psychic power was humanity's birthright, the next stage of our evolution. That by suppressing it, the Emperor was crippling the species, limiting our potential to compete with races that had mastered the warp millennia ago. He presented evidence, carefully compiled over decades, showing that trained psychers were no more dangerous than trained warriors, that the catastrophes blamed on psychic mishap were almost always the result of ignorance and fear, not power itself. He brought data, statistical analysis of psychic incidents across 1,000 worlds, comparative studies of sanctioned versus unsanctioned psyker populations, testimony from the 1,000 Sons' own librarius, showing decades of safe psychic practice. His case was methodical, comprehensive, devastating. The Emperor's response was not to debate the evidence. It was to declare Magnus wrong and close the discussion. No counter-argument, no presentation of contradicting data, no engagement with the evidence at all. Just divine decree. I have spoken. The matter is closed. That alone troubled me. Why refuse to engage with evidence? Why shut down debate rather than win through superior argument? A father confident in his position does not need to forbid questions. He answers them. But it was what happened after the council that revealed the true purpose. Magnus, defiant and heartbroken, returned to his homeworld of Prospero and continued his research in secret. Not to rebel, not to betray, but because he believed the Emperor was making a mistake, and a loving son must save his father from error, even if it means disobedience. When he discovered Horus's betrayal through psychic divination, he used forbidden sorcery to warn the Emperor directly, breaching the psychic wards of the Imperial Palace to deliver his message. The warning was garbled by the warp, twisted into apparent nonsense by the chaos gods who wanted the heresy to proceed. But the core message got through. Horus would betray. The War Master was lost. The Emperor needed to act. The Emperor's response was to order Magnus's arrest and the destruction of his legion. Not for defiance. The order predated Magnus's warning by weeks. It had been issued immediately after the council, sitting in sealed files, waiting for the moment when it would be needed. Not for breaking the ban. Lemon Russ, Primarch of the Space Wolves, received his orders with perfect clarity. Bring Magnus to Terra in chains. If he resists, kill him and destroy his legion. But for what Magnus had seen, for what he now knew, the warning Magnus delivered was not merely about Horus. In his psychic vision, Magnus had seen deeper. He had seen the Emperor's plans for the webway, He had seen the golden throne and what it would require. He had seen the architecture of the Imperium's future. And in seeing it, he became a threat that could not be tolerated. So Magnus and his entire legion had to be eliminated, obliterated so completely that the truth they carried would die with them. The Space Wolves came to Prospero with kill orders disguised as compliance actions. They were told Magnus had turned traitor, that the Thousand Sons had corrupted themselves beyond redemption. Leman Russ, loyal unto death, believed every word. He brought his legion to Prospero and burned it to ash. They burned the libraries first, the repositories of knowledge that Magnus had spent decades building. Texts from every culture humanity had ever encountered. Research into psychic phenomena, warp physics, the nature of consciousness itself. All of it put to the flame before any combat began. Then they slaughtered the Thousand Sons, hunted them through the ruins of their city, killed them with righteous fury, believing they were purging corruption rather than murdering scholars and researchers. Magnus could have fought back. The Thousand Sons were powerful. They could have made Prospero into a graveyard for the Space Wolves. But Magnus held them back, refusing to let them kill their brothers. Even as his world burned, he clung to the belief that this was a mistake, that the Emperor would realize his error and call off the attack. The Emperor did not call it off. Magnus was driven into the arms of the very chaos gods the Emperor claimed to be protecting us from. The Thousand Sons, betrayed and broken, had nowhere else to turn. It was not salvation. It was assassination with heresy as justification. I felt something break in me when I realized that. Not my faith, not yet, but the shape that held my faith in place. The structure I had built my understanding upon. Cracks were spreading, through it like fracture lines in ice under weight. The evidence was mounting. Each discovery added weight to a conclusion I did not want to reach. But I could have stopped then. I could have walked away, burned my notes, and returned to my duties with my certainty shaken, but intact. Millions of Inquisitors have done exactly that. They find something that troubles them, and they choose faith over understanding. They choose the comfort of the lie over the cold of the truth. But I have never been good at lying to myself, so I went to the Black Library. The Eldar keep records that humanity does not. They have watched our species since before we learned to make fire. Their archives contain truths we have forgotten and lies we tell ourselves. Accessing the Black Library requires negotiation with the Harlequins, who guard it zealously. It requires trading secrets that could get you executed just for knowing. It requires walking through the webway, that ancient network of paths through the warp, protected but never safe. I gave the Harlequins everything they asked for. Codes to inquisitorial safe houses across 7 sectors. Locations of weapons caches that my order had hidden over centuries. Names of agents in deep cover, people who had given their lives to remain hidden, whose identities I betrayed with a word. I traded lives for knowledge, and I did it without hesitation. That alone should have told me I was already damned. The Harlequin who guided me through the webway never spoke. They wore a mask painted with laughing faces on one side and weeping faces on the other. They simply led me through corridors of impossible geometry, through spaces where distance had no meaning, and direction was a suggestion rather than a rule. We passed doorways that opened onto burning suns and frozen voids. We walked through galleries where the walls were made of crystallized screams. Time lost meaning. I could have been walking for minutes or years. Finally, we reached a chamber carved from a single piece of wraith bone. That psycho-reactive material the Eldar use instead of stone and steel. The walls hummed with psychic resonance, so old it predated the fall of the Elder. This chamber had existed before the birth of Slaanesh. It had survived the death of an empire. There, on a plinth of black stone, was the record I sought, a memory crystal. Elder technology far superior to anything the Mechanicus could manufacture. The Harlequin gestured to it, then withdrew to the entrance. Leaving me alone, I hesitated. Some part of me knew that once I touched that crystal, there would be no return, that the knowledge it contained would change me in ways I could not predict or control. But I had come too far, given up too much, betrayed too many people. I had to know. I pressed my mind against the crystal, and it responded. What I experienced was not images or words. It was pure memory, transmitted directly into my consciousness. For a timeless moment, I was not myself. I was an elder Farseer named Eldanesh, standing on Craftworld Ulthway shortly after the fall. I inhabited his mind, saw through his eyes, felt his ancient wariness and bitter wisdom. I watched humanity with the Farseer's ancient eyes, saw our species as the Elders see us young, crude, vital with the terrifying energy of a race that does not yet understand its own mortality. And I saw what they saw when they looked at the Emperor. He had visited this Craftworld, not as a conqueror, not as an enemy, as a diplomat. This was early in the Great Crusade, before the Imperium had grown strong enough to threaten the Elder directly. He came seeking knowledge of the Webway, that ancient network the Eldar had inherited from the Old Ones. He offered alliance, trade, mutual defense against chaos. The Farseers gathered to hear his petition. They looked into his soul with their psychic sight, examining his intentions, his nature, his future. And they rejected him, not out of arrogance, though arrogance was present, not out of xenophobia, though xenophobia was there as well. They rejected him because they had looked into his future and seen what he would become, what humanity would become under his rule. You seek to do what the Old Ones did, the eldest Farseer said. Her name was Irilith, and she had lived through the fall itself. Her voice in the memory was like wind chimes over a grave, beautiful and terrible. You seek to forge a tool from a species, to shape a race into a weapon designed for a specific purpose. The Old Ones created the Krork to fight the Necrons. They created us to guide and maintain the galaxy. They created a dozen other species, each designed for a function. The Old Ones failed, and their failure birthed horrors that still haunt the galaxy. The Krork devolved into the Orcs. We fell into decadence and birthed Slaanesh. You will fail as well, but your failure will be worse, because you will succeed first. The Emperor's response is seared into my memory with perfect clarity. I do not seek the Old Ones' path. I seek only to give humanity the strength to survive what is coming. Your species chose pleasure and arrogance. You chose the path that led to your fall. Humanity will choose differently, because I will give them no other choice. Then you are not a savior, the Farseer replied. You are a tyrant who believes his tyranny is love. You will create an empire that cannot exist without war. You will forge a species that cannot imagine peace. And when you fail, as you must, you will leave behind a wasteland of suffering that will endure for millennia. The Emperor did not argue. He simply left. But before he departed, he turned back and spoke one final sentence. Your species had the luxury of choosing its own path. Humanity does not. What is coming will not allow for choice. So I make the choice for them. And the Farseer, looking into the far future with her gift of prophecy, wept, because she saw a galaxy where humanity survived, but humanity's soul did not, where the Imperium endured for 10,000 years as a monument to suffering, kept alive by the sacrifice of its God and the death of its hope. He will save them, she said to her fellow seers after he departed, and in saving them, he will damn them to something worse than extinction. He will damn them to immortality without meaning. He will create an eternal war machine that cannot remember why it fights. They will become a race that knows only suffering and calls that suffering sacred. When I pulled my mind from the crystal, I was on my knees, vomiting onto the wraithbone floor. The experience of being another consciousness, of seeing through alien eyes, had left me disoriented and sick. But worse than the physical reaction was the knowledge. The confirmation. The Harlequin had returned. They stood over me, motionless, their mask unreadable. Now you see, they said, and their voice was not mocking but almost sad, almost pitying. Now you understand why we pity you. You are a weapon that believes itself free, a tool that thinks it chooses to serve. The most perfect slaves are those who love their chains. I wanted to rage at them, to defend my species, my Imperium, my Emperor. To argue that we were more than tools, more than weapons, more than a machine designed for eternal war. But the words would not come, because the Farseer had been right. 10,000 years of history proved it. The Emperor had succeeded in making humanity survive, and in doing so, he had created something monstrous. I returned to the Phalanx Hollow, emptied out. The journey back through the webway took days, but I do not remember any of it. I walked like a servitor, following pre-programmed paths, my mind screaming into the void of what I had learned. But I was not done. I could not be done, because the final, most terrible question remained unanswered. Did he know? Did the Emperor understand what he was creating? Was this the result of impossible choices and tragic necessity? Or was this the plan all along? I found the answer in the oldest archive in the Imperium, the Chamber of Remembrance beneath the Imperial Palace, where the earliest records of unification are kept. Records from before the Emperor revealed himself, from when he was simply another Terran warlord competing in the ashes of old night. I should never have been able to access that chamber. My credentials were insufficient. My authority did not extend to Terra, let alone the palace's deepest vaults. But I requested access, and it was granted within hours. No questions asked, no review. Just clearance delivered by anonymous Vox. A simple message, access granted. Chamber 7 Delta. No time limit. Someone wanted me to find what I found. Someone wanted this testimony to exist. The chamber smelled of old paper and preservation fields. Not the chemical smell of modern preservation, but something older, more organic. The servitors maintaining it were ancient, their augmetics corroded by age, but still functioning. Models I had only seen in archaeotech museums. They did not acknowledge my presence. They simply continued their eternal task of maintaining records no one was meant to read. I found the data slate in a storage unit marked with pre-imperial dating. M29, 300 years before the Great Crusade. The device was archaic, its screen cracked, its casing made of materials that no longer exist in the Imperium. But it still functioned, its battery maintained by a direct feed from the chamber's power grid. When I activated it, the screen flickered to life with ancient phosphorescence. It showed me the Emperor's first recorded words. Not the public declarations, not the speeches to his followers, but private communications. Messages he never meant for history to see. A message to a subordinate, a warlord named Eric Tyrannus, commander of the Thunder Warriors' First Company. The date was M29, 847. The message was brief, clinical. The words of a general planning a campaign, discussing logistics, considering contingencies. Begin the genetic modifications. The subjects must be strong enough to conquer Terra, but flawed enough to be disposed of afterward. We need warriors to forge the Imperium, not to rule it. Create heroes for the founding myth, not candidates for succession. The next iteration will be more stable, more controllable, and utterly loyal. They will know nothing of this generation. History will be written to exclude the first fathers. They are the foundation, and foundations must be buried. I read that message 17 times. Each time, my hands shook harder. This was not a message written in the heat of battle, not a decision made under pressure or in response to unexpected circumstances. This was planning, premeditation, cold calculation made years before the first Thunder Warrior drew breath. A blueprint for creating expendable heroes, designed to be butchered the moment they were no longer useful. The Thunder Warriors were always meant to die. Their instability was not a flaw to be regretted. It was a feature, an engineered expiration date built into their very cells. And if the Thunder Warriors were disposable, what did that make the Astartes? What did that make the Primarchs? What did that make all of us who served in his name? I found more messages in that data slate, dozens of them, hundreds. Communications between the Emperor and his earliest allies. Malcador the Sigillite, the first custodians. Geneticists whose names are not recorded in any history, who were themselves purged after their work was complete. One message, dated 6 months before the first Thunder Warriors were deployed, contained a single paragraph that destroyed the last fragment of my faith. The species requires myth. Truth is insufficient. Humanity does not rally to logic or even to survival. It rallies to stories. We will give them a story of divine salvation, of a father who loves them enough to sacrifice himself for their survival. We will make that story true through repetition and martyrdom. And once the story is believed, once it becomes the foundation of their identity, it will not matter what truth underlies it. The story will be the truth. The myth will be the reality. And they will defend that myth with their lives, because to question it would be to question themselves. He planned it, all of it, not in broad strokes, in precise, calculated detail. The Great Crusade was not a desperate attempt to save humanity. It was a carefully orchestrated campaign to create a mythos. The Emperor was not a reluctant savior thrust into leadership by necessity. He was an architect building a machine, and humanity was the raw material. Every piece fell into place then. Every anomaly, every gap in the records, every tragedy I had studied for 80 years. The pattern was not a pattern. It was a blueprint. Monarchia was not a painful lesson. It was calculated radicalization. By destroying the word-bearer's perfect faith, the Emperor created zealots who would turn to any source of meaning. When they found chaos, their fall was not a failure. It was inevitable, intended. Because the Imperium needs an enemy. It needs a great war to justify its brutality. Without chaos, without the heresy, humanity might have questioned, might have asked why we needed legions at all, might have wondered what we were building toward. The Council of Nikaea was not about psychic safety. It was about eliminating any power base that could rival his own. Magnus and his 1,000 sons represented evolution beyond the Emperor's control. They represented the possibility that humanity might transcend its need for him. They had to be destroyed not because they were dangerous, but because they were free. The heresy itself, the ultimate tragedy. 9 legions turning traitor, Terra besieged. The Emperor forced to kill his most beloved son and enter himself upon the golden throne. It is the central myth of our faith, the proof of his sacrifice and our unworthiness. But what if it was planned? What if the heresy was not a tragedy, but a culmination? What if the Emperor knew that only through ultimate sacrifice could he transform from warlord to god? That only by dying, but not dying, could he create the eternal martyrdom necessary to sustain an Imperium for 10,000 years? I have no proof of that. No data slate message admitting it. But the evidence forces me to ask, what purpose does an Imperium serve, if not war? What function does humanity serve in the Emperor's design, if not as an eternal army? The Great Crusade could have ended. After Eleanor, after Horus was named War Master, Terra was secure. Humanity was united. The infrastructure for peace existed. The mechanisms for governance were in place. The Imperium could have transitioned from conquest to consolidation, from expansion to development. But peace would have raised questions. Questions about why we needed space marines once the galaxy was conquered. Why we needed the Inquisition if there were no heretics to hunt. Why we needed the administratum's endless tithes and the ecclesiarchy's demanding faith if humanity was safe and prosperous. War silences questions. War justifies atrocity, and an eternal war makes the war machine itself sacred, transforms military necessity into religious obligation, makes suffering not merely inevitable, but meaningful. The Imperium is not broken. It is not corrupted. It is not a degraded remnant of a better age. The Imperium is exactly what it was designed to be, a self-perpetuating engine of suffering that can never rest, never question, never stop. Because to stop is to think, and to think is to realize what we have become. That is the truth the Emperor buried beneath 10,000 years of myth and martyrdom. I sat in that archive for 3 days. I did not eat. I did not sleep. I simply sat surrounded by evidence of premeditated horror, trying to find a way to unsee it, trying to discover some alternate interpretation that would let me return to faith, some context that would explain, some missing piece that would redeem. But there was none. The truth was cold, comprehensive, inescapable. The more I looked, the more evidence I found. Messages about necessary cullings and strategic martyrdom. Plans for the heresy written decades before it occurred. Contingencies for the emperors, retirement to the throne. All of it planned, all of it deliberate. So I did the only thing I could do. I wrote this testimony. I gathered every piece of evidence. I recorded every discovery. And I prepared to die knowing what I know. But before I die, I must deliver the verdict. Not because anyone asked me to. Not because I have authority to judge a being who may be a god. But because someone must say it. Someone must stand as witness and accuser. Even if the accused cannot hear, even if the accused is beyond judgment, even if the accusation changes nothing. So I say this now, with full knowledge that these words condemn me. The Emperor of mankind is guilty. Guilty of the systematic creation of suffering as a tool of control. Guilty of engineering the conditions for the heresy to ensure eternal war. Guilty of treating sentient beings as components in a machine, to be used and discarded according to their utility. Guilty of claiming love while demonstrating only calculation. Guilty of building an imperium that cannot end, cannot evolve, cannot heal. Guilty of creating a species-wide prison and calling it salvation. The charge is not merely tyranny. Tyrants are common. They rule through fear and violence, and they are eventually overthrown. The Emperor's crime is more profound. He created a tyranny that disguises itself as love, a prison that its inmates defend with religious fervor, an eternal war machine that believes itself a bastion of hope. He did not merely conquer humanity. He rewrote what humanity means. Consider the evidence. Exhibit 1: the Thunder Warriors, created, used, and exterminated according to plan. Their crime was victory. Their reward was death. Their purpose was to serve as the foundation of a myth, then be buried so that myth could be built upon their graves. This establishes intent. This proves that disposability was built into the design from the beginning. The Emperor did not make a tragic mistake with the Thunder Warriors. He created them to be disposed of. Their deaths were scheduled before their births. Exhibit 2: Monarchia. The destruction of perfect faith to create perfect zealotry. The word-bearers loved the Emperor more than life itself. They built him temples. They spread his word. They worshipped him with pure devotion. That love was not treasured. It was not guided. It was exploited. Destroyed systematically to create the rage that would drive them into Chaos's arms. The heresy needed traitors. Monarchia manufactured them. The Emperor looked at perfect faith and decided it was more useful broken than whole. Exhibit 3: the Council of Nikaea and the burning of Prospero. The elimination of any path to evolution beyond the Emperor's control. Magnus represented the terrifying possibility that humanity might transcend its need for him. The Thousand Sons represented knowledge that could free rather than bind. So Magnus was not corrected or guided. He was annihilated, along with all the knowledge he represented. Not because he was dangerous, because he was free, because he showed humanity a path that led beyond the Emperor's design. Exhibit 4: the pre-imperial messages proving conscious planning. The Emperor knew what he was building. He knew it would require myth, martyrdom, and mass delusion. He built it anyway. Not because there was no alternative. Not because circumstances forced his hand. But because this was the design he chose. This was the tool he wanted to create. These are not accidents. These are not the tragic consequences of impossible circumstances. These are features, core specifications of a system designed to function exactly as it functions now. Brutal, eternal, grinding human souls into the fuel that keeps the machine running. And that brings me to the motive, the question that haunted me through every stage of this investigation. Why? Why would a being of such intelligence, such power, such apparent care for humanity's survival choose this? Why create endless suffering when peace was possible? Why engineer your own apotheosis through martyrdom when simple rulership was within reach? The answer is in the Eldar Farseer's words. He sought to create a weapon from a species, not an empire, not a civilization, a weapon. Humanity is a weapon aimed at chaos. The Imperium is the mechanism that keeps that weapon sharp. Every war we fight, every sacrifice we make, every generation born into suffering and dying in suffering, all of it serves to maintain our edge, to keep us hard, to prevent us from softening into something that could not fight the battles he foresaw. And for a weapon to remain sharp, it must be used, constantly, eternally, without mercy and without rest. The Emperor looked into the far future and saw something we are not permitted to know. A threat so vast, so terrible, that it required the transformation of humanity into a weapon capable of eternal war. Not a species that could sometimes fight when necessary, but a species that could do nothing but fight. A species where peace was not merely difficult but impossible, where every instinct, every institution, every thought was bent toward war. To accomplish this, he needed to strip away everything that makes us human except hate, faith, and the capacity for violence. Love becomes loyalty to the Imperium. Hope becomes faith in eventual victory. Peace becomes heresy. Curiosity becomes tech heresy. Compassion becomes weakness. Everything soft, everything gentle, everything that might lead us toward peace had to be burned away. Not by accident, not by corruption, but by design. This was not a tragedy. It was a choice. The Emperor chose to save humanity's body by killing its soul. He chose to make us survive at the cost of everything that makes survival worthwhile. And he made that choice knowing what it would cost, knowing what it would create, knowing that we would suffer for 10,000 years and call that suffering sacred. That is not salvation. That is damnation dressed in golden armor. I wanted to find a simpler explanation. I prayed for corruption, for a fall from grace, for some external evil that had twisted a good design into nightmare. But the evidence does not allow that comfort. The horror is in the original plan. The nightmare is the blueprint. The Imperium is not failing. It is succeeding exactly as intended. The gears of this machine are not broken. They are perfect. Every guardsman who dies screaming in a trench is a gear turning correctly. Every world burned by exterminatus is a gear turning correctly. Every child raised to fear and hate and pray without understanding is a gear turning correctly. Every psyker fed to the golden throne. Every servitor lobotomized into mindless service. Every planetary governor executed for failing to meet arbitrary quotas. All of it is the machine functioning as designed. We are not the remnants of a golden age. We are the product of it. This endless suffering is not decay. It is function. We look at the Imperium and see dysfunction, corruption, cruelty, and waste. But those are not bugs. They are features. The cruelty keeps us hard. The corruption keeps us cynical. The dysfunction keeps us desperate. All of it serves to prevent us from asking the one question that would unravel everything. What are we fighting for? And the Emperor, sitting on his golden throne in eternal agony, presides over it all. Is he aware? Does he know what we have become? Or has 10,000 years of torment stripped even his vast mind down to nothing but the basic function of maintaining the Astronomicon? I cannot know. No one can know. But I am forced to wonder if that agony is not punishment but penance. If in those long millennia of pain, he has had time to review his choices, to see the Imperium he built and recognize the monster it became, to understand, with perfect crystalline despair, that his grand design succeeded beyond his greatest hopes and failed beyond his darkest fears. He created a humanity that can survive anything, but survival is all we can do. We have forgotten how to live. We have forgotten what we are surviving for. We fight because fighting is all we know. We suffer because suffering is all we remember. We pray because prayer is the only comfort we are permitted. 10,000 years ago, the Emperor told the elder Farseer that humanity would choose differently because he would give them no other choice. He kept that promise. We have no choice. We cannot evolve. We cannot question. We cannot stop. We can only fight and die, and be replaced by new fighters who will die in their turn, forever. Because the machine requires it. That is the Emperor's legacy. Not the Great Crusade, not the Imperium, but the transformation of the human species into a thing that can be nothing but a weapon. The murder of our potential in service of our survival. The sacrifice of everything we could have been for the sake of continuing to exist. And we worship him for it. That is the deepest horror. Not that he made us into this, but that we love him for it, that we praise his name as we suffer, that we call our prison a gift and our warden a father. The conditioning is perfect. The myth is complete. Even knowing what I know, even seeing the mechanism exposed, I feel the pull of it. I feel the desire to fall to my knees and beg his forgiveness for my doubt. That is his greatest achievement. Not the conquest of the galaxy, but the conquest of the human capacity for self-determination. He has made us into beings who cannot imagine freedom because we have forgotten what freedom means. We are slaves who love our chains, prisoners who defend our cells, weapons that believe themselves free. So I deliver this verdict knowing it changes nothing. The Imperium will endure. The war will continue. Humanity will keep feeding itself into the machine, calling the grinding of the gears a prayer, and the Emperor will maintain his eternal watch, the Astronomicon burning with his undying will, guiding us through the darkness to new wars, new suffering, new sacrifices. But let this record exist. Let it testify that one man, however briefly, saw the truth and named it for what it was. Not to change the system, not to save humanity, but simply because someone must witness, someone must accuse, even if the accused is beyond judgment, even if the accusation is heresy, even if the only result is my own execution. The verdict is delivered. The Emperor of mankind is guilty of the crime of perfect design, guilty of building a system so complete, so self-sustaining, so perfectly adapted to its purpose that it can never be anything but what it is. A weapon that has forgotten it is made of human flesh. A prayer that has forgotten it was once a scream. A species that has forgotten it was once free. And I, Inquisitor Valerius, am guilty of understanding this. Guilty of seeing the machine while standing inside it. Guilty of comprehension. Guilty of looking at the sacred and seeing the profane. Guilty of touching the divine and feeling only cold metal. My execution is scheduled for dawn. The charges against me are numerous: unauthorized access to restricted archives, trafficking with xenos, conspiracy against the throne, and heresy of the highest order. All are true. I do not dispute them. I could have hidden my investigation. I could have destroyed the evidence and returned to my duties. But I chose to write this testimony. I chose to compile the evidence. I chose to be found. Because someone must bear witness, even if the witness is damned, even if the testimony is heresy, even if no one ever reads these words. I have made arrangements for this testimony. It will be hidden in 3 separate locations, each guarded by mechanisms that will preserve it for centuries. One copy is hidden in the deepest vault of the Phalanx, misfiled as maintenance logs, buried in bureaucratic chaos where it might survive for millennia unread. One copy is entrusted to a harlequin who promised to preserve it in the Black Library, where it will exist alongside all the other forbidden knowledge humanity has tried to forget. One copy is encoded into the genetic memory of a colony of bacteria living in the water reclamation systems of Terra itself. Information written into DNA, preserved in the bodies of organisms that will reproduce and spread and carry this truth in their cells long after I am dust. Whether anyone will find it, whether anyone will read it, whether anyone will believe it, I cannot know. Perhaps it will rot in darkness, unread and useless. Perhaps it will be found and burned, adding one more heresy to the Imperium's endless list. Perhaps it will drive whoever finds it to madness or despair. Or perhaps, in some distant age, someone will find it and recognize their own doubts reflected in these words. Perhaps they will feel the cold recognition I felt. Perhaps they will know they are not alone in seeing what should not be seen. And perhaps, just perhaps, that will be enough. That is enough. That is all I can do. 3 hours remain. I can hear the guards approaching to escort me to the execution chamber. The sound of their boots on stone is regular, mechanical, perfect, like the gears of the machine, like everything in this Imperium that functions exactly as designed. Before I go, I return to where I began, to the Sanctum Imperialis, to the sacred tremor felt in the jawbone, the Golden Throne's heartbeat. I understand it differently now. It is not the pulse of divine will. It is the heartbeat of a prisoner, a being of impossible power and intelligence, locked in eternal torment, maintaining a light that guides humanity to more war, more suffering, more efficient grinding of flesh into faith. Is he aware of what he built? Does he remember his original design? Or has the agony stripped away everything but the base function, leaving only a divine servitor, maintaining its task without understanding why? There is no way to know. But I allow myself one final speculation, one last heretical thought before I die. Perhaps the greatest punishment the Emperor suffers is not the physical agony. Perhaps it is perfect memory, perfect understanding of what he created and what it has become. Perhaps he sits on that throne, sustaining the Astronomicon with his dying will, fully aware that he succeeded, that his plan worked flawlessly, that humanity survived. And perhaps, in that awareness, he knows the one thing he cannot change: the Imperium does not need him to be alive. It needs him to be dying, forever. Because a dead god is history, but a dying god is faith. We do not worship him for what he achieved. We worship him for what he lost. The eternal sacrifice, the undying martyr. As long as he suffers, we can tell ourselves our suffering has meaning. As long as he endures, we can believe our endurance is holy. The machine needs him not as a father or savior. It needs him as a symbol of perfect martyrdom. Proof that suffering is sacred, that pain is purpose, that there is no escape, no rest, no peace, only eternal service until death, and then service beyond death. If he could die, truly die, the myth would collapse. We would be forced to face what we have become without the comfort of his eternal sacrifice to justify our own. We would have to ask why we fight, what we are building, whether any of it has meaning beyond perpetuating itself. So he cannot die. The Imperium will not allow it. We sacrifice 1,000 psychers every day to keep him alive, not because we need the Astronomicon, but because we need the story. We need the Father on the throne, suffering for us, validating our suffering by his example. We need the proof that our pain is holy because his pain is holy. That is the final horror, the deepest layer of the design. The Emperor built a machine that requires his own eternal torment to function. And now the machine sustains that torment with religious fervor. We are his jailers. We keep him alive in agony because we need him in agony. Because without his suffering, our suffering would be meaningless. He is not our salvation. He is our prisoner. And we are his. The guards are at the door. It is time. I have no illusions about what comes next. I will kneel before an inquisitorial tribunal. I will be found guilty. I will be executed with the full ceremony owed to a fallen inquisitor. My name will be struck from every record. My deeds will be erased. In 3 generations, no one will remember I existed, but this testimony will remain, hidden in darkness, waiting, a seed of doubt planted in the certainty of the Imperium. Perhaps it will grow, perhaps not. Either way, I have done what I can. The door opens. The guards enter. They are polite, professional, efficient. Young men, probably born on the phalanx itself, trained from childhood to serve the Inquisition. They believe they are arresting a traitor. They do not know they are executing a witness. As they bind my hands, I feel the sacred tremor one last time. The pulse of the golden throne, transmitted through the stone of the phalanx, through the vacuum of space, through the warp itself, felt in the jawbone, in the teeth, in the bones. It no longer feels like a heartbeat. It feels like the ticking of a clock, counting down to nothing, measuring out eternity in regular, mechanical intervals. Tick, tick. The sound of a machine that cannot stop because it was built never to stop. And I realize the throne is not sustaining him. He is sustaining it. The Emperor's will is the only thing keeping the machine from recognizing it no longer needs him. The moment he fails, the moment his consciousness finally ends, the Imperium will discover it can function without a god. And that discovery will be worse than his death, because it will prove that we never needed him at all, that the myth was always a lie, that we built this nightmare ourselves, in his image, and he was only ever the excuse we used to justify it. That is the final judgment, the ultimate verdict. The Emperor is guilty of giving us exactly what we needed to become what we are. And we are guilty of taking that gift and calling it love. The guards lead me from the cell. The corridor ahead is lit by lumens that flicker and hum. 43 steps to the execution chamber. I count each one. 43. The number of minutes missing from the Rangdan genocides. The number of Thunder Warriors in Eric Tyrannus's first squad. The number appears in my investigation again and again. Perhaps it means something. Perhaps it is only coincidence. It does not matter now. Behind me, hidden in 3 separate locations across the Imperium, this testimony waits. A record of a crime that cannot be punished, and a verdict that changes nothing. But it exists, and existence is enough. At the execution chamber door, I stop. The guards pause, allowing me a final moment. Standard protocol. Even the condemned are owed a moment of reflection before the end. I look back down the corridor, toward the distant heart of the phalanx, toward Terra beyond, toward the golden throne and the dying God who presides over it all. I forgive you, I whisper, knowing he cannot hear, knowing that even if he could, forgiveness from me means nothing. Not for what you did, but for believing it was necessary, for loving us enough to destroy us, for sacrificing everything, including your own soul, in service of a design you knew would damn us. I forgive you because you were right. Humanity would not have survived any other way, and survival, even corrupted survival, even damned survival, is better than extinction. But then I think of the Thunder Warrior, dying at Mount Ararat. I think of the word-bearer chaplain, weeping in the ashes of Monarchia. I think of Magnus, watching his world burn. I think of the billion humans who have lived and died in this Imperium, grinding themselves to dust in service of a machine that does not love them. And I whisper one more thing. But I do not forgive us. We had 10,000 years to become something better. 10,000 years to transform the Imperium into what it pretended to be. And we chose not to. We chose to worship the machine instead of dismantling it. We chose to call our prison sacred instead of escaping it. That is our crime, not yours. Ours. Then I turn and enter the chamber. The Inquisitor General is waiting. His name is Torquemada Severus, a man I have known for 60 years. We trained together, fought together. He was at my elevation to interrogator lord. I was at his wedding. His daughter calls me uncle. He will not meet my eyes. The charges are read by a servitor, its voice flat and mechanical. Unauthorized access to restricted archives. Trafficking with xenos. Conspiracy against the throne. Heresy of the highest order. Each charge is true. Each is death 1,000 times over. Do you dispute these charges? The Inquisitor General asks. His voice is steady, but I can hear the strain beneath it. I do not. I reply. Do you seek the Emperor's mercy? I do not. Do you repent your crimes? I pause. This is the moment. If I repent, they will give me the mercy of a clean death. Quick, painless. If I do not, they will make an example of me. Days of agony before the end. I repent nothing. I say, I have seen the truth. I have named it. I have recorded it. That is not a crime. That is duty. The Inquisitor General closes his eyes. When he opens them, they are wet. Then may the Emperor have mercy on your soul, for we cannot. The sentence is pronounced. Death by neural flaying. Conscious. Recorded. My screams will be added to the archives as a warning to others who might doubt. I kneel. The neural crown is placed on my head, its probes seeking the soft spots in my skull. The executioner activates it. The pain is beyond description. Every nerve in my body suddenly screaming at once. But I do not scream. I will not give them that. I think of the Thunder Warrior. I think of the Word Bearer. I think of Magnus. In my final moment, I do not pray. Prayer would be obscene now, knowing what I know. Instead, I think of the Thunder Warrior, dying at Mount Ararat, looking up at Valder with confusion in his eyes. We won, he said. We won. Why? Now I understand. We won because we were always meant to lose. The victory was never the point. The war was. The eternal war. The grinding. The sacrifice. The perfect machine of suffering that keeps turning, because it was built never to stop. We won, And our reward is this: 10,000 years of victory that feels like defeat. 10,000 years of fighting without knowing what we fight for. 10,000 years of prayers to a God who might be nothing more than a consciousness trapped in amber, perfectly preserved but utterly helpless. That is the Emperor's legacy, and that is my final testimony. The pain increases. I feel my mind beginning to fragment under the assault. Soon there will be nothing left but screaming. But for now, in this last moment of clarity, I hold one final thought. Someone will find this testimony. Someone will read these words. Someone will know they are not alone in their doubt. And perhaps, in some distant age, that will be enough to begin the only revolution that matters, not against the Imperium, but against the lie that the Imperium is inevitable, that this is the only way humanity can survive. There are other ways. There must be other ways. The Emperor knew that. He chose this way anyway, and that is his crime. Not that he saved us, but that he saved us in the only way that guaranteed we would never be free. The blade falls. No, not a blade. The neural flaying continues. My mind dissolves. Thought becomes pain, becomes nothing. But somewhere, in 3 hidden locations, my testimony waits, and the sacred tremor continues. The Golden Throne's heartbeat, felt in the jawbone of every faithful servant. Regular, mechanical, eternal, just as he designed it to be.